Aware that it was being released just as 16-bit consoles were gaining traction in 1991, Batman Return of the Joker clearly reflects Sunsoft's ambition to blur the lines between console generations. By pushing the NES's technical boundaries, the Japanese studio crafted a title that, visually at least, could go toe-to-toe with some early 16-bit games. But this ambition wasn't limited to visuals. Breaking away from the world of Tim Burton's film, Sunsoft delivered an original story rooted in comic book lore. Does it make you forget the previous game? Today, we're revisiting Batman Return of the Joker. I felt like taking another look. To start with the basics, Batman Return of the Joker is a follow-up to Batman the video game, released 2 years earlier. Unlike its predecessor, which was loosely tied to the Tim Burton film, this one stands on its own, telling a completely original story that pits Batman against his archenemy, the Joker, true to its title. You can clearly feel the comic book inspiration, even if the tone doesn't clash too much with the first game. From the moment you start playing, one thing becomes instantly obvious. This game looks absolutely stunning. Technically speaking, it's exceptional. Batman Return of the Joker is a visual showcase. I wouldn't call it a tech demo, that would undersell it, but if I had to draw a comparison, I'd say it sits halfway between 8-bit and 16-bit generations in terms of graphics, animation, and sound. Everything from the background detail to sprite size, character design, and even parallax scrolling is done with extraordinary care. The screen is basically free of flickering. Okay, there's a bit, but it's rare and discreet, just like the slowdown. And perhaps more important than raw power is the artistic direction. The previous Batman game already had a great visual identity, but here, some of the environments are simply breathtaking. The color choices, the contrast, the mood. The first game was dark and moody. This one is more colorful, but also way more badass. Batman himself has never looked this cool. The soundtrack plays a big role in that too. It's Sunsoft, so you expect solid music, but here, they went all out. Every track is a banger. If there's a downside, it's that some of these themes repeat 2 or 3 times in the game, but given their quality, it's hard to complain. Still, worth pointing out. As you can see, the game offers a wide variety of environments and just as many gameplay mechanics. I really appreciated how it constantly tries to surprise the player. You can tell that each section was carefully crafted to add variety and freshness. Speaking of surprises, I'll come back to that in a moment. Another key difference compared to Batman the video game is that this sequel leans less into ninja action and more, well, kind of into beat-em-up territory. Not fully, of course. This isn't a brawler, but it's definitely a more deliberate, less momentum-based experience. Rushing ahead usually ends in a quick game over. Let's stay on gameplay for a moment. You can't switch between weapons on the fly anymore. Instead, you pick them up as items, more like in an arcade game. And in a rather odd design choice, you select them by shooting at the icons. For example, to go from weapon C, a spread shot, to weapon B, a homing shot, you have to shoot the item on the ground twice. It sounds manageable, but often these items appear in front of enemies, basically acting as shields, so you're forced to wait until they disappear. Once you know this, it's fine, but your early runs will definitely suffer from this quirk. Another addition, Batman can now slide by pressing down +A, which works as a dash and even as an attack against some enemies. You can also collect energy capsules, grab 8, and you become temporarily invincible. Now let's get into my main gripes, the ones that earned me some heat in my first review, but hey, that's the game. My biggest complaint? The movement physics. Batman's controls lack precision. Let me explain. When you press a direction, Batman doesn't immediately start running. There's a slight delay. Same when you stop. He doesn't halt on a dime. It's more realistic, sure, but in a game that demands tight platforming, This floaty momentum can become a serious issue. And here's the real paradox. The controls feel heavy and deliberate, but the level design is tight and exacting. You need pixel-perfect jumps and precise positioning. It's like the game is constantly demanding something your character isn't really built for, which brings me to the other standout aspect of the design. Everything is scripted. Enemy spawns, attack patterns. You either memorize them or you get blindsided. What I mean is that Batman: Return of the Joker is full of ambushes. Enemies appear from nowhere, and unless you already know they're coming, it's often too late to react. In most action games, you have some visual buffer. You see the enemy coming, prepare your weapon, plan your next move. Not here. I'd say 75% of the time, you're reacting after the fact. It reminds me a bit of Shadow Dancer on Master System, especially with its oversized sprites. Is this a flaw? Honestly, not necessarily. The key is accepting the game's structure for what it is. Take the snow level, for example. It's like sheet music. You have to know when to stop to avoid falling missiles, move forward at just the right pace to trigger enemies, dodge their attacks, counterattack immediately, stand in the exact right spot. It's tedious at first, but once you internalize it, the game becomes genuinely fun, and the brilliant atmosphere and visuals certainly help. So, to sum up, this strict design approach didn't bother me. What really did was the lack of precision in the controls. If the level design weren't so demanding, it wouldn't be such a big deal. But as it is, some sections, looking at you sewer level, are borderline painful. Batman's not unplayable, but his movement feels poorly matched to certain parts of the game. The devs must have realized this too, since they gave you a very forgiving health bar. Ironically, despite the high difficulty curve, the game isn't that hard to beat. You get infinite continues, and unless you fall into a pit, the game's pretty generous. That's how I finished it during my first playthrough, by brute forcing my way through. But that's really the worst way to play it. If you're interested in the game, take the time to understand its design, and accept that you'll have to retry the same section over and over until it clicks. Now, I've criticized the level design a lot, but that doesn't mean the game's devoid of clever ideas. There are some genuinely cool sequences. The train stage, for example, is dynamic and breaks away from the rigid pacing I mentioned earlier. The elevator sequence is also quite fun. And then there are the shoot-'em-up segments, where Batman sports a jetpack and looks absolutely badass. I just wish they were longer and more developed, because they really work. Let's talk bosses. They perfectly illustrate the game's forgiving side. Boss fights are more like duels. Both Batman and the boss start with a set number of points, usually 80,000 for Batman. In regular stages, your health is shown as bars. In boss fights, it's shown numerically. There are 5 bosses in total, and they're pretty varied in form. The goal is simple: deplete the boss's life bar faster than they deplete yours. Every hit shaves off points. And when I say these fights are chaotic, I mean it. They make Castlevania 4 look tame. That said, I didn't mind the chaos, though I'll admit the bosses are kind of basic, with weak patterns, except for the final Joker forms, which are more impressive. So yes, I've been fairly critical of Batman: Return of the Joker, but despite its flaws, the presentation, visuals, soundtrack, and sheer personality make it hard to dislike.